podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Roll Network.
How are you doing today, Peter?
What are you reading a script? How are you? I am fine.
Your robot is still from 1968.
Danger, Will, danger. This is almost worth watching just the video for that. Jamie, one of those 1950s robots, or outside a used car dealership.
That's fun. That is fun.
Today, actually, we had a Podcast Roll Network conversation. Those who are members of the Podcast Roll Network spent an hour talking with each other. We recorded it, so we're going to release it on our podcast at some point. And nice. It was super fun to listen to. So many right now of our Podcast Roll hosts are advocates for children with special needs. And so it was really interesting. One represents lawyers and attorneys who support families who are navigating special education law. And another works very closely with training and professional learning for teachers in schools. And so, in fact, I think Lori, who is the co-founder or founder of Senia and has a podcast, she listened to our podcast and was like so moved by you and your willingness to talk about your family so that it is not something one hides, but is in like lots of families have needs, and here are ours.
Yeah. Don't we all? I mean, that's a part of it. We all have needs, and our perceptions of those needs. I think everybody's needs are hard because of their own experience.
Yep.
And the comparing of needs is never a good way to go about it.
No.
There's no needs Olympics.
That's so interesting. It's kind of like I once got into a healthy argument with an individual who, when I said that there's no hierarchy of pain, and they said, no, I feel my situation is more difficult. And I said, oh, I think you have multiple opportunities to be hurt. But in terms of the individual feeling pain, there's no hierarchy of pain. And it was, still didn't agree.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about our guest, who is somebody who you know pretty well.
I do.
I want to hear about your experience. I know she will too. But
I told you, I texted you, I said, get ready for some serious Jamie bias on this episode.
Good. I would say, though, she is one who doesn't wait for situations to come to her, particularly around kids and learning. Like, she's in classrooms, she's in schools, and she cares so deeply for the success of all of those who are essentially in her care. And so that's what I loved about this conversation that you're going to hear today. You want to tell us a little bit about our person, and then we'll jump into the conversation, and then we'll get back on the other side and deconstruct.
I would say that Milena, Dr. Garganigo, is just, I think, a super special leader. Listening to her talk here also reminded me of, this is the word that came to my mind. She is a teaching and learning wonk. She is so interested and good at it. Her brain is so tuned to all aspects of teaching and learning that if you are like me, who wants to talk about teaching and how learning happens and the different ways in which pedagogy plays a role, how does curriculum get layered in, let alone standards and different levels, grade levels, and child development, this is the podcast for you. This is the episode for you. She is just spectacular. And it's so fun for me. This isn't going to take you down the political policy conversation space, but it does get you into that level of thinking that I think makes the biggest difference in schooling. And that is quality of teaching. That's the point.
Yes. And I would say for the leader who's listening, I would want them to also see that when she is advocating for high quality instruction, and she will make references to voice and choice, that she really is challenging systems to think about what is it that kids want and need, as opposed to what do we think that they need. I think you need this. I think you need this, as opposed to like pausing and letting the kids sort of help guide us on what kind of coursework we might create, what kind of programs we might develop, like really being thoughtful of the child. And so that to me, that reorganizing of learning outside classrooms and things like that is something that I know that leaders are interested in. And she lends a voice to that work.
there were points at which I had a couple of, oh, Peter, I wish you would ask this, that are related to policy in terms of how they are engaging with what do they call the five pieces or five categories of
The key components of empowered learning.
Yeah. So path, place, pace, voice, and choice. That because some of them I'm like, oh, how do you do that? How does that work in a traditional system where you're really trying to figure out multiple ways to assess?
Well, let's talk about that on the other side.
Yeah.
All right. Jamie, before we do head into that interview, I do want to remind our listeners, we do have a sponsor, IXL. And just like Milena says, empowered learning, as you noticed, and as you just said, defined by voice, choice, path, and pace, IXL brings this vision to life by providing personalized learning platform that automatically adapts to each student, ensuring that they always are challenged at the right level while offering a custom path to close knowledge gaps. Trusted by 96 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. Visit IXL.com/imperfect today to discover what IXL can do for your school. All right, Jamie, you're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast. I am Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Almanzan, and we'll see you on the other side.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Milena Garganigo, Assistant Superintendent for the Clayton School District in Clayton, Missouri. And she's also a proud alumna of her district. She champions student agency through path, place, pace, and voice and choice. And we'll unpack that in a minute. And what really excites me about our guest is that Jamie, my co-host on the pod, is so inspired by how Milena prioritizes high-level collaboration and shared leadership, breaking those traditional models and embracing empathy, passion, and continuous learning. Milena, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a pleasure to meet you. Okay, you and I were emailing back and forth. And what I learned about you is that you got to work pretty closely with Jamie Almanzan. And you said that you regularly quote something that Jamie said to you in your past work. So I'm dying to know what that is. So can you tell us?
Yeah. So when Jamie was really inspiring with the work that he did with us, and it was all around like coaching through an equity lens and everything like that. And one of the lines that he used with us that resonated with me so much, which he says is not his line, it's Hattie's line, but I attribute it to Jamie because he's the one that used it with us, is the idea of having to have enough trust to be able to burn it every day. And when he said that to me at the very beginning, it was so inspiring that it's like, that's how I like live my work with everyone.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I think about, you've had multiple roles within your own district. I imagine as you continue to coach and develop those around you, you can't enter with a directive. You can't enter with a declaration. You've got to build that trust. And I imagine there are ways that you think about that, particularly whether it's Jamie's influence you or your own work. What are some ways that sort of have been part of your bread and butter in building trust?
Yeah, a lot of it is being present, being in the spaces, being with people, being in the mess. So one of the things that I tell new teachers when they come into the district is we're in the mess with you. The work we do is very messy, and we're going to be there with you. And we're going to think through things. And we present ourselves as thinking partners and co-researchers. So that's our definition of coach.
Yeah.
And so that allows us, I think, to be able to spend time with people and think about it. But it's also like pausing and knowing about them as people before knowing about them as educators. So asking them about their children, thinking about those kinds of pieces, sending texts when, something's about to happen. We went through a tornado last year, and the first thing I did was text as many of the teachers as I knew in the building that I back up to just be like, check in on them. How were they? Were they okay? And knowing that we were going to have to sort of pivot a plan for education, I needed to know that our teachers were in an okay space before.
That's amazing. I mean, first of all, you use the word pivot, which any of us who led through the pandemic, that word is like verboten. So please don't ever say that word again. I was got in a fetal position in the corner there. I was like, with our board constantly asking, can we pivot? How will we pivot? But more importantly, I was thinking two things. One, so this iceberg model of above the water is what you can see, and those are the actions that people take. But yet you have to be mindful of the base of the iceberg in terms of how people have been socialized, their beliefs, their principles, their values. And what I feel like you're speaking to is how you get there. I mean, you get there by really understanding people and by asking about their families, and it sort of reveals to you what they value and what's important to them. So you really get a sense of who your people are. The other thing I would want to note is for those who are watching the video of our conversation, they'll see that you're actually not in your office. You're at a school right now. Your district is one of many in the St. Louis area. It is the only one that's in session today after a major snowstorm and ice and all those kinds of things. And so you're actually at the building supporting school. You sort of threw this line out there of, oh, the school I back up, but you're literally backing up right now and supporting the principal and the staff. Can you talk about that for just a moment? That's an intentional decision of the superintendent and your team to be there for your staff and teachers.
Yeah. So we made a decision a very long time ago that the presence of the central office team, so essentially the cabinet, we needed to be in buildings and in the work with people. And so we chose to do it in a way where each of us backs up a school. So what that would mean is that anytime the principal is out, I'm the person here to sort of help support. And anytime that we have anything sort of big happening, I'm in the building and working with people. So everybody sees us as very present in the space. And it's not to overtake the work of anyone. It's absolutely to support it. So we do whatever the principal wants us to do. So last night, my texts back and forth with the principal was really like, what do you want my role to be today? I live closer to the school, so it was easier for me to get here earlier. So I was here before people started showing up just to welcome them into the space, ask them how their drive was, and get everybody ready to be able to accept children.
Yeah, I mean, I just imagine that creates a level of calmness or confidence in a decision, particularly if the decision is radically different from all of your neighbors. So to see you is not that you're sitting in some office, in central office, making decisions, that you're on the ground with them.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that you live close, and that's because I think Clayton Schools just runs through your blood. I mentioned in the opening that you're an alumna of the Clayton Schools.
Yes.
And so I'm really very interested in your personal history I think you've mentioned, as a full circle educator. And I'm interested in that being a core part of your mission of helping students become independent learners. And so I guess my question would be, can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how do you leverage this deep root in Clayton? How do you use the 5 key strategies I mentioned in the opening? I'd love to explore it a little bit, this path, place, pace, voice, and choice, really to empower students, help them build agency in the classroom and beyond.
So people joke that I bleed orange and blue. Those are our colors. Like
Me too, but it's because I'm a New York Mets fan.
I am not a Mets fan.
Oh, we can edit that out.
Diehard Cardinals fan. But I've really been in the district since I was 5. I had the luxury of being invited into the district because my mom was a teacher here. And so we have a board grant program. And so children of faculty can attend. And so that's how I came to the district. I love this district. And through my career here as a student, as a teacher, as an assistant principal, as an assistant superintendent, I've gotten to know the community really well. I've been a part of the community, and I think that helps me I know the deep roots. This is a community where grandkids come back to school here and everything like that. So knowing those families really well is I'm kind of a good barometer of knowing how the community might respond to something as being a part of it. But then also I think about the fact that as a student here, there were teachers who inspired me in different ways, and they're the ones who stick with me. And when I started working here, it was like that. Each phase of my career, I've thought about what did I want. So as a teacher, it was like, as a student, what did I want in a teacher? And that's what I tried to be. As a principal, it was like, as a teacher, what did I want in a principal? And that's what I tried to be. And so this sense of empowering learning, those were the teachers that were the most inspiring to me. I had difficulty reading. I love reading, but I had difficulty reading. So like reading and memorizing things was not an easy way for me, but the teachers who had me doing hands-on things, being really like transferring the learning into something that was meaningful to me, were the ones that had the greatest impact. And I think that's probably what influenced me to be a Spanish teacher. Was my Spanish teachers were the most influential in the kind of hands-on transfer stuff.
Yeah, a lot of role playing. I mean, if you're going to actually learn the language, you got to actually do it.
So like doing skits, I remember like when we learned parts of the car, like they would drive their car up and we'd go outside and we'd get in the car and do skits with their actual car. They would bring
so
pens
funny.
in.
I don't know the words in English, but nonetheless right? Spanish. I'm like, that's a car.
Yeah. So
I may need that lesson. I'm going to be a head of school of an elementary school in Cartagena, Colombia, starting in July, and
wow,
I better start working on the parts of the car. I'm glad they didn't ask me that in the interview. Can you also, I mean, so where does this genesis of path, pace, place, voice, choice, I mean, these are all intentional words that obviously not only you have defined, but you've done a sort of a shared image of what that looks like within the district. And I'm really curious about that because I know that as leaders listen to this, particularly those who are aspiring, they're trying to figure out how do they cast a vision that people can really grab hold of and that can translate into meaningful options for kids. And so those words, they jumped out at me. So I'm curious if you could just unpack that a little.
Our current strategic plan, we developed a goal that talked about individualized, personalized, and equitable learning. And the first thing that I said when we developed that was we're going to spend a lot of time arguing about what those terms mean. And so what my team looks like is, as the assistant superintendent, I see myself as a generalist, and I need people who are specialized in content areas. So I have coordinators who work with me in each content area who are specialized within those content areas. And I went to them and said, we need to decide, like, we're the leaders of teaching and learning in the school district of Clayton. So we need to decide, what do these terms mean so that all of us are using the same language. And so that's where we developed the term empowered learning, and really thinking through the sense of like empowerment and what were the components that factored into that. And it felt like voice and choice were easy ones. And then the path, place, and pace came as a consequence of our conversations and also coming out of COVID. That's where the place is sort of factored in, because we were doing this work coming out of COVID and we knew that sort of changed the landscape of education. And so place didn't have to mean within the four walls of a classroom. It could be greater, different than that. Path, there's still some misunderstandings about what that means. It's not about the path that I take to learning. It's the path that I take to demonstrate my knowledge. And so that can look like a whole lot of different kinds of assessments. And then pace is that sense of, like, when you think about individualized learning, that kids have sort of options within their choice that also allow them to work more deeply in one area or not as deeply in others, as long as we're staying with the standards, right?
Sure. Yeah. Can we go back to path? I want to better understand. You used the term learning, and I can't remember what the other term.
Demonstrating knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the difference?
So I feel like a lot of people, when they think about path, they think about, I'm going to have this kid doing these activities, this kid doing these activities. To me, that's like differentiation. And it's the path that I was interested, like our team was really interested in having people think about, is what are the different modalities and ways that kids can demonstrate understanding of content. And so that may look paper and pencil for one kid. That may look like a podcast for another kid.
Understood. Okay.
And so that path being that demonstration of the learning versus the how do I access the learning. The accessing of the learning, to me, just feels like a given. We should be differentiated.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
But
that makes sense.
The push, I think, for people, and the harder part, I think, for people, was to think about not giving the same assessment to everyone, but thinking about the individual in the how do we demonstrate our knowledge.
I understand. And it also sort of conjures a memory for me around giving kids multiple opportunities to be able to demonstrate knowledge. So if they were unsuccessful in one modality, that being able to provide them a different path to demonstrate that knowledge is appropriate. And sometimes we would get into philosophical, I would say like healthy debate about responsibility and all those types of things. And that sometimes I felt frustrated, only because there would be a question of how many different ways are we going to allow a child to do this, or how many opportunities do we provide that? That's not how the real world works. And I'd say, actually, that is how the real world works. Like, we give people lots of opportunities to be able to demonstrate that they have done something correctly, or we give them ways to do that. Our guest today is Dr. Milena Garganigo, Assistant Superintendent for the Clayton School District. And in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension called nested patterns. And nested patterns really speaks to how people in an organization want to be together. So there's collective aspiration of what do we want to create together. And those 5 terms that you have so beautifully talked about, I mean, really speaks to this compelling purpose. What do we want to create together? Nested patterns is, how are we going to be together? And so inside that dimension, there's a term, high-level collaboration. And high-level collaboration is pretty well understood to mean that people work together, learn from each other. They follow the adage, the smartest person in the room is the room. In your work, you have focused on breaking that mental model of central office administrators being distant from the classroom, that instead you are present. And we talked a little bit about just operationally that you are present today in an elementary school because that's the way that the central office works in terms of having a backup plan to support. I'm curious from the teaching and learning piece, the curriculum piece, that's on the ground presence really must foster high levels of collaboration and that psychological safety, or what I refer to as positive connectedness, to create this sort of culture of deep learning. Can you talk a little bit about what there's the traditional walkthrough where someone from central office magically appears and sort of walkthroughs, and I don't even know sometimes the purpose other than maybe just to sort of monitor that something is happening. But it sounds like you go so much deeper in terms of building meaningful relationships. The fact that you text teachers, that really speaks to you are side by side, not a hierarchical above, that there are leaders at every level. You all have different roles, and the yours is as the generalist to support and maybe to deploy the specialists when necessary. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in your district? How does that sort of on the ground presence look, and collaboration, all those kinds of things?
I talked a little bit about always wanting to, each time I changed roles, wanting to think about what I wanted in that role.
Right.
And my perspective of central office when I was a teacher and when I was a principal was a little like when they showed up, there was a problem. And so I was trying to break that mental model. And at the same time, I got advice. When I moved into administration, I got advice from somebody that said, don't wait until you're done teaching to move into administration because you've waited too long. So I miss the classroom every single day of my life, which puts me into classrooms then, because it's like what I miss. So my best days are the days when I start on the carpet reading with kindergartners and I end in a science class where maybe I don't really understand the content, but I'm watching and experiencing learning with children. Those are my best days. And so in thinking about that, I proposed to our central office team of really reshaping and starting with our new teacher induction program and reshaping what that looks like. So in our district, the cabinet runs all of new teacher induction. So it's a week of induction. And so we run that whole program so that people see us as part of the work. And in that process, one of the things that I do with teaching and learning is I bring a teacher in. So that our induction program is a 2-year process. And so my team, so right now it's me and our director of assessment and professional learning. We coach all new to the district teachers. So it doesn't matter if you've been teaching for 20 years or a year, you're going to have a coach. And like I said before, we define that as a co-researcher. So somebody who's going to be in the work with you. And this is where we try to parallel things with the children of this idea of you having voice and choice in your work. Somebody who's really good within their practice maybe doesn't need the same thing as somebody who is new to the work or something like that. So we've tried to individualize it in that way.
I can imagine you're a 20-year veteran who may want to engage in more action research, and you're their co-PI in that sense. Yeah.
Yep,
okay.
Exactly. And so we sit down during new teacher induction. I bring a teacher in to model what a coaching conversation will look like. Because for a lot of people, they're not used to the relationship with an assistant soup, and they don't necessarily know what our definition of coaching looks like. So we do sort of a fishbowl model of that. And what's interesting with the teacher that generally I bring in is she's very honest about when she first met me and she first heard this. She came from another district. She was intimidated by me. She was scared. She didn't really know what it meant. Every time I came into her classroom, and she tells the new teachers this to then say what she had to do to sort of overcome that, to develop the relationship that we have. And her term that she uses with them is that she figured out that we were focused on the same thing. We had the same goal in mind. And once she figured that out, she was like, why wouldn't I capitalize on this opportunity?
Yeah. Did you have to change the way that you approach your presence to make people aware that your presence was about support? And the reason why I asked that is you prompted a memory for me, which was, I remember there was an amazing teacher, Jonette Ford, taught 5th grade, and she did each year partner with the art teacher and did a massively large civil rights museum that the kids did a ton of research. They became the docents. They took over a hallway. It was amazing. And I wanted to be a part of that because I was just so inspired. And so I asked if I could come in and also teach one day. And I did. And I thought we would co-teach. And I came in, and as I came in to teach, she left because I think part of it was I'm somewhat intimidated by the title of coming into her ring. Also, I wasn't really clear on that we would do that together. And I mean, I was really hurt. We joke about it now because I stayed in touch with her, but it was what I failed to do was to really have that conversation, that sort of the purpose, and what I hope to learn from her, and because the way that she prompted kids and pulled such deep meaning from the work. But yeah, so I was just kind of curious, how did that look for you? Or how does
Yeah,
that look
well,
for you?
one of the things that I do, and this is a consequence of this one teacher saying to me, the way for them to sort of get over the hump of me being in the space was for me to interact with the children right away. And so then they realize, and I pretty specifically, like, we maintain a very strict line of coaching and evaluation, that they're very different. I don't evaluate any of the teachers. And if I'm brought in for an evaluative piece, we're very upfront about why I'm being brought in for that and how that's
Understood.
going to look different than
Yeah.
the coaching piece. But so engaging with the kids right away, getting on the level of the kids. So like being on the floor. When I walk into a space, I'm a very tall person. So I'm like 6 feet tall and I wear 3-inch heels. So when I walk into a space, it can be like, I recognize that it can be intimidating. So the first thing I'll do is sit on the floor with the kids, because then I'm at the same level with the children and the teacher doesn't notice me as much, right? Because now I'm a part of the group. I'll engage with the kids, but all of those things I think are very deliberate moves for everybody in the space to understand why I'm there, for the children to understand why I'm there. Like, I'm a
Right.
part of the work that we're doing, for the teacher to not feel like I'm there to critique them or anything like that. I'm really there to help. I also will ask them a lot of times, what do you want me to do? Put me to work. So if you want me conferring with a group of kids, I'll confer with a group of kids. If you like, whatever you want
Right.
me
you
to
want
do,
it to be
it
meaningful.
may not look
Is that-
great, but
Right,
I can
right.
do it.
I'm curious. And then at the end of your time there, I imagine you're there 20 minutes or something like that. It's because you don't, it's just, what does the follow-up look like for when you've been there? A note, do you write a note back? Because
Yeah.
obviously, particularly if it's a new teacher who's understands your presence and its purpose, she was in my room today, and then they talk about it with each other. And so how do you
Yeah.
sort of maintain that? You talked about building trust before you can burn trust. So that presence is a building trust moment as well, I imagine.
Yep. So the first thing, so I meet monthly with all the teachers that I coach, and the very first meeting, it's their meeting, not my meeting. I don't come with an agenda, but the very first meeting is, let's establish some understanding of what do you need from me. And so some of it is like asking questions about, can I just stop into your space, or do you want to know ahead of time? So sometimes it's just a text that morning to say, hey, I'm planning to come by. And that gives them an opportunity to say, we have an assembly today, or we have whatever's happening. It's not a good day for the kids. Don't come. Great. I'll go somewhere else. Like, I'm not offended by any of that. It's also that also gives me an opportunity to ask, what do you want that follow-up to look like? I'll come in multiple times throughout the month. Do you want to wait until our monthly meeting to talk about that? Do you want an email from me saying, here are some things that I noticed? Each of them chooses a focus. So here's the thing that I want you to focus on when you're in my space. And so I give them the agency to tell me, like, how do you want the information back? Anytime they ask me for an email, the one thing that I always like sort of say to them is, I'm happy to do that, but it takes away the ability for us to negotiate meaning. And so I will be very careful in how I write the email to not be judgmental. But if you feel like there's something in there that doesn't jive
Just
with
being
what's going
mindful
on,
of the fact that the tone is so
Right.
difficult to interpret.
right. So then I say to them, I need you to text me, because I don't think, like, those things I don't feel like can wait until the monthly meeting. Like, I don't want somebody stewing over something that I didn't intend in my email. So I'll be very careful with those emails to like read them multiple times. But there's still times where things come across not how I intended it to be. And so we're developing that relationship. Sometimes they'll text me about it. A lot of times they won't. I'll hear about it from somebody else, and then I'll know, oh, okay, I need to go back and sort of repair the harm
Yeah.
that has been created there. But I think trying to give them as much agency and voice and choice in what that work looks like is really important to me.
I'd like to ask you a question that I ask of every guest who comes on our program. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
What I like about that term is I think it allows you to be able to make mistakes. And so I think a lot of times in these roles, I'm the face of a lot of things. People expect me to have the answers, but like an imperfect leader is, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes. I have a sort of philosophy of leadership that you don't have to agree with every decision that I make, but you should understand why I make the decisions that I make. And so I feel very much like people should be able to ask me when they don't like my decisions, and I should be able to defend it. And if I can't give them an explanation to it, that's probably an indication to me that I need to rethink my decision. And I think that fits all into this idea of imperfection, of like, I say all the time, like one of the images I use in new teacher induction is Pigpen from Peanuts. And I talk about how our work is messy. Like we're humans, we're working with humans. And it's not robots, it's not machines. We're trying to focus on student achievement. We're going to make mistakes. And it's more about how do we come out of those mistakes. And so that's what I really like about that term is like it gives the permission to know that it's there. And then it's up to me to figure out how I deal with the imperfections, right? So people are surprised sometimes when they get a visit from me or an email or a text apologizing for something. They're like, I've never had an administrator in a different place apologize for something. I feel like I got to own my decisions. I am also Catholic and I have a lot of Catholic guilt. And so,
well, as a Jew, oh, look, I get it. Oh, that's so funny. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom Project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention An Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest today is Dr. Milena Garganigo, Assistant Superintendent for the Clayton School District, just outside of St. Louis in Clayton, Missouri. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made and then what did they learn from it. So, Milena, what happened?
the thing that I thought about was something that happened pretty recently. So like coming out of COVID and thinking about elementary, like teaching and learning and curriculum, I thought we had an opportunity that we could capitalize on to connect like our humanities teaching. So connect social studies and literacy. And so I invited the coordinators in and the library coordinator in to really think about this vision that I had of connecting the content of social studies with the skills of reading and writing with literacy. And I thought we were on a good path to think through things. And then at the same time, we partner with Washington University in St. Louis around our science curriculum. And they decided that they were going to change units in the resource. And so that had an impact on my timeline. And then we had some conversation with our teachers about the resource that we were using for math, and our multi-year contract with them was up. Our teachers were not really happy with the resource that we were using. And so it became sort of this perfect storm of, was I really going to change all 4 content areas at the same time? And I had to question myself really of how much change can a system sustain at once? And then our state made another decision to put some pretty strict parameters in place for literacy involving the science of reading. And that sort of forced our conversation in a different way. And so, yes, we did change all four at the same time.
Oh, wow. I was going to ask. Yeah.
And some of the things that influenced that decision were kind of out of my hands, and other things were part of my actual decision. And I think this is where the trust part with the teachers became so crucial, because I knew I was asking for something like a lift that was had the potential to be kind of disastrous.
Yeah, I mean, I imagined as this story was unfolding that I actually saw what I thought was going to be a train wreck, and so it sounds like all the trains like just happened to just barely miss each other, and everyone went on their trail on the track. Fine.
Yeah.
If I understand correctly, you have these four areas. So you had social studies and reading literacy as one bucket. You had the science, you had math, and then science of reading was sort of a fourth influencing. So you had state intervention to whatever extent. You had a partner at WashU. If I remember, they had science kits that they would make. Okay. And then these other areas. So, okay. Typically I ask what got overlooked because we're trying to unpack what became somewhat of a disaster. It sounds like there was a storming period of this where probably lots of feelings were felt and you weren't even sure if this was going to work out. As you were looking back, what would you say got overlooked through this situation?
I think the sense of I probably should have anticipated what was going to happen with math, right? If I had really thought through what our contract was with the company, if I had really been thinking through what our teachers were telling us about the resource at the time, I could have anticipated that. The stuff with WashU, I don't know. The stuff with the state, I could have anticipated differently. They just moved at a faster pace than we thought they were going to.
And they typically did. I can remember 10 years ago when they were bringing all these these committees together to look at language arts, and that was going to take forever. Yeah.
But so I think I was a little Pollyanna-ish in the sense of like the things that were happening within these content areas, and I wasn't putting the pieces together well. And there were some people on my team who were saying to me, are we sure that this is like the direction? And I was coming through this lens of being very excited about this sense of visioning a partnership between social studies and literacy.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit more, because you said we're coming out of the pandemic. What was the sort of motivating factor there? Because that was vision. The others were reacting to, were situational.
So our typical review cycle, so the humanities go through a review cycle at the same time, and then STEM goes through a review cycle with the board at the same time. And so the social studies and literacy were sort of in this place of self-study and really thinking through things. And we were arguably deliberately not 100% aligned with our elementary social studies curriculum with the state standards. We taught things out of order because we looked at our system. It was deliberate, but we looked at our system as a K-12 decision. And so we had sort of a 1 through 4, 5 through 7, 8 through 10, and then electives. And so in doing that, we were doing things out of order from the state. The teachers came to us and said, can we stop doing it this way? And so they wanted the standards back in the right grade levels, because accepting kids from other schools often created issues in that way. And so we listened to the teachers and said, let's make that change, but let's take that as an opportunity to really think about the connection. And we were using the Learning for Justice standards as a way to drive some of our work within social studies. And so making those connections to expand from the state standards to also think more broadly with that. And so in that, I said, maybe this is also an opportunity to think about, like, we basically within our system write all of our own curriculum and then use texts as resources. And so I said, let's look at this as an opportunity potentially to look at the joining up of social studies and literacy, because I thought it would be an easier lift for teachers. Elementary teachers have such a huge lift with all of these content areas that it's like, if we can embed these together, it would be maybe a lighter lift for the teachers. And so that was really a lot of what was kind of driving thinking.
And I'm trying to put myself in the perspective of someone who grew up in Clayton, you went to school in Clayton, you taught in Clayton, and now you're leading in Clayton. And for those who are listening, to understand Clayton's place in the St. Louis region, and you're a stone's throw from Ferguson, you have experienced over the last 50 years somewhat of the just extreme growth within Clayton in terms of St. Louis's enrollment and population has diminished as Clayton and even west of you has grown. And so and you participate in the voluntary busing program, right? The transfer program, and students and children who are coming in from the metropolitan area into Clayton, which in itself is an urban community, suburban urban community. And I imagine this was a real opportunity and intentional to sort of embed literacy and social studies together to understand one of these tenets, place, where we are. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's exciting.
Well, I was exciting too.
That's really exciting. While also navigating all these other pieces that were being thrown upon you. So as you look back on relationship, what did you learn about relationships or what new relationships were formed?
So one of the things I think it's like relationships with teachers, it's relationships with the coordinators. So with my team. So really thinking through things with my team first and like that relational piece and the relationship between those coordinators. So like I was asking social studies and literacy to work really closely together.
Right.
I invited library into the conversation to say, I think you have an important role in like the choosing of texts and the choosing of materials here. So there's that relationship piece. There's the piece like as teachers in the classroom started to hear that these were the things that were happening of Garganigo, what are you doing? And so me sitting down with people to talk about like why. So this goes back to my whole theory of you don't have to agree with me, but you should know why.
Right.
And me saying that I do honestly feel like what I watched during COVID, what I watched our teachers doing, I was like, I really feel like we have an opportunity here to try to lighten the lift and in a way that's purposeful. And this idea of like transfer, like we've been writing like curriculum and with UBD documents forever, right? And this idea of like transfer goals and thinking through like the skill in another space. What does that look like? Like I was really excited about the work, but I had to like get people excited. Sometimes. And there is a certain level of trust that the staff has with me that while they weren't like super jazzed by the thinking around this, they're like, okay, we'll try it. So then when we got to the point where we knew that we were going to have to change all four at the same time, the relationship piece shifted to what is my role in helping to make this happen and also setting teachers up for success. So when I think about the instructional core stuff from Harvard, from Richard Elmore, where he talks about the interaction of students and teachers in the presence of content. So me thinking about like that summer, we did a lot in the spring of rewriting curriculum and those kinds of things. It is not a partnership of social studies and literacy the way I dreamed it to be. And a lot of that's because of the state restrictions on things. But there is some thinking still about like that still could come for us. It's just not there yet. So thinking a lot about what does that summer before that look like? And so it was important to me to give teachers time and space, not only to write the curriculum, but then to also understand it and to know it. And so we built in days in the summer where we paid them to come in to unpack units that the writing teams had written. We provided childcare for them. So like everything that we could come up with that were barriers to people getting here in the summer to do the work, we tried to address.
Yeah.
And many of them took advantage of that. And I do think like on the other side of this, I do think we are much stronger as a consequence of this work, but it was not without a lot of
What would you, so I guess I would ask, what would you have done differently if you could do it again?
Part of me feels like I gave up pretty quickly on the connection of social studies and literacy. And so how could I have sort of continued to hold tight to that? I would have, now I think I'm more aware of things that I wasn't paying attention to then, so that we don't get back into a situation like that. Like I have a response and at what point could I have slowed the train for something? I continue to think about that. If I had really thought differently about this, could I have continued with this vision, but slowed the train in some way to say, it's not going to happen this year, but moving forward, let's take care of the science and the math thing. And then let's think about the humanities piece. So I think I maybe abandoned that partnership too early.
In the end, what would you say that was something that was good that came out of this? Because it sounds like you did get to address all four, while potentially you didn't get to go as deep as you wanted to. As you are in place and in space all the time, I'm sure you're beginning to see the fruits of that labor, of everyone coming in, the support you provided, the work that they did, the being able to serve as a generalist and trust the specialists to carry out a vision. So I imagine that was something that was good that came out of this work.
And I think the connections between teachers, like they became much more dependent on their PLCs and that kind of stuff to be able to. So like, I actually think our PLCs are sort of in a better space of being
Yeah.
more high.
Oh, that's an interesting byproduct. Yeah. Instead of
Yeah,
admiring problems and coming
yeah.
together, but they actually are purposefully working on this work. Yeah, that's great.
And when we got through that first year of implementation was hard for everyone. The second year becomes that much easier because we've done it once. We're through the chute once.
Sure.
And we know some of the things that we want to change and everything like that. So I think we're doing good work. I think the level of involvement of people was higher than it, like we have a lot of the same people do a lot of the work. And that piece forced us to like really
great.
expand.
I imagine the induction work that you and your partners and the core team at Central Office do together, because one of the things you want to make sure is as new people come in, they understand the work and they have clarity around it as well. So I imagine that also was improved. That's great.
Yep.
Our guest today was Dr. Milena Garganigo, Assistant Superintendent for the School District of Clayton in Clayton, Missouri. And Milena, I wrote a few notes, but one of the things when we were starting off the conversation, even before we hit record, you're like, I hope that this is helpful material for the people who are listening. And this is what I think so many superintendents really desire to have a role when it comes to teaching and learning, when it comes to instruction, when it comes to building really strong systems where they can show teachers support and not just sort of walk through blessing the good work and then leaving and disappearing, not just being that sort of symbol of leadership, but rather really being a genuine partner. And I'm really grateful for your time today. I'm really grateful for sort of the protocols that you've put into place that I think people can take right away back to their districts, particularly those who are in small and rural districts, that they have to do it all, that you've given them some really strong ways to do that. So they will be building trust so that if there is a time they have to burn that trust, you're welcome, Jamie. We threw it in there for you. They can do that. But truly, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This was fun.
We are back, Jamie. You ready?
I am. Can I start? So I ended on the front end with this question about the intentional design of path, place, pace, voice, and choice. And the one you brought up during the interview was path. And I want to talk about that one again in terms of the multiple forms of assessment. She says, her quote is, what are the different modalities and ways that kids can demonstrate their understanding? And that it may look different than paper and pencil for one kid or a podcast for another.
Yes.
That's so great. I'm all in. That's exactly what I think. The one thing I wanted you to ask was, how do we do that? Is there, it makes me want to talk to Milena and ask, like, how are you doing that? How many assessments do teachers give to know whether or not kids know it or don't know it? And how do they know what types of assessments to give, given that multiple assessments are possible? That at some point, teachers must be drawing some lines as to how much they will assess and allow for the opportunity to learn it, that's exactly what I believe it's about. But it's hard. If I'm a secondary teacher, this is speaking from a secondary teacher, but I think an elementary teacher has the same argument. Secondary teacher, I had 180 kids. Like, how many different assessments would I have tried? I don't know if I could have done it. I don't know if I had the ability to do it.
I might direct us back to the voice and choice piece, because it isn't the adult who has to decide what that alternative assessment might look like to demonstrate knowledge, that there often is a menu of options that a child can access and choose to do to be able to demonstrate. I think the challenge sometimes is that a kid doesn't know what, like, that information or that knowledge is in there, and they're looking to the teacher to figure out the best way to have them demonstrate mastery. When I think of the model that I use to lead people, there's a dimension, collective aspiration, and in there is the shared image of success. And sometimes we don't even know what we're talking about. So what does mastery mean? And so I don't mean that it's 100%. I'd say that a child mastered or understood 80% of the content that was required. And so that sometimes is liberating to say, okay, so then are there ways to do that? A podcast, I was going to say diorama, but that almost makes me just only 20 years older than the robot from the very beginning of our conversation. Like a little Lincoln logs and
Shoebox diorama.
With some labeling.
The
Lord have
volcano
mercy.
that erupts.
That's right. Everything's Vesuvius. Wait, what were you studying here?
They're like satellites.
I really couldn't come up with anything in my head. I was like, what? What's funny? Satellite.
That's funny. Oh, Lord. I love This is why I call her a wonk, and that she's trying to think about how to actually teach and learn in what is a system that isn't really designed to do that. And so that's the brilliance of Milena, is that she's really thinking about, okay, what do we have and what do we have to do? Even in our after action review, this is an opportunity to try this other way of doing. Let's merge literacy and social studies. And I'm like, I'm all in. I'm all in. That sounds great. And
I had a teacher friend that was determined to combine civics and physics. He was so determined to do that because he and his wife were responsible for creating all these, through a block schedule, these really well coordinated classes that were often social studies and science. And so he was like, we're trying to figure out civics and physics. I'm like, okay, good luck.
that's so cool. That's so cool. These are the little worlds that I just dig. I dig that kind of stuff because I can't even, besides X, I can't think of anything that would cause them to overlap. And that part I loved. I think I like their categories. That path was the one that stood out to me as, oh, that's an interesting way to frame assessment. And it is a difficult one to do in any system. Even though I do like your reframing from the student perspective, that I fully agree. I still would love to hear how different districts are framing and are understanding assessment. I mean, assessment ends up being, that's the linchpin. Like the whole point of teaching is whether or not they got it. And you've got to figure out, did they get it? And the problem of understanding of whether they got it or not is directly rooted in whether your assessment is worth anything. Like, is it good? And can they demonstrate it in a different way?
Yeah. I mean, you've given me some time to think about this a little bit more as you were talking. And I'm thinking to myself, any master teacher will have already, as they're introducing the topics, are talking about how students will be assessed. And so so it shouldn't be a surprise when they're asking to demonstrate mastery about what was the expected outcome of the lesson that they were teaching. And so then it's, do you want to write a song? Do you want to write a poem? Do you want to do a piece of artwork? Do you want to do a podcast? Do you want to write a report? Do you want to take a multiple choice test? Whatever it might be, as a way to, because you've always, throughout this entire season, reminded me the importance of the formative assessment along the way. And so that way we know where there's mastery on that discrete skill or topic, as well as where there might be gaps in overall knowledge on a unit of study.
I am glad you're holding on to the concept that formative assessment matters. That really is one of the biggest learnings I've had in 32 years of public ed, is that the better you are at multiple types of formative assessment, the better you are at understanding whether or not the teaching's working. The summative assessments are about putting it all together. And for the most part, they're not going to be great at helping you understand the gaps in what kids know and don't know.
Yes.
I think the summative gives you compass types data. And I think she names this, that the thing that I want to talk about in terms of her own leadership is related to the many district offices, I think, stay at compass level leadership as it relates to the schools that they support. And I don't think Milena does this. In fact, I kind of want to clarify in the interview, it may come off as when she describes of being a backup to a school, that she was at an elementary school when she did the interview, and it happened to be a snow day that day. It almost came across flippant. I want people to fully understand what she and her district office are doing. And that is, they are on the site all the time. This is how they lead. They lead from a place of doing formative assessment of leaders, of teachers, of school sites. This is what she does. I can't even think of a time that I had a meeting with Milena when I worked in the district that was in her office.
I'm
once.
really glad you raised this up, right? Because it is true. I understood that she is in buildings all the time, has a deep relationship with teachers, and is a presence, a welcome presence with kids and teachers, that she's regularly there. When she talked about being on the ground on the floor in a kindergarten classroom, and how she even self-deprecates 6 feet with 3-inch heels. So I'm like 6'3". Like, it's good that I'm down there with the kids.
Yeah.
And one could have just immediately heard that and thought, oh, yeah, that's nice that on what are late start days for snow, that she lives near there, and so she gets there early and is in the building. That's great. We should all do something like that. And well done. Really, what she was trying to communicate was for all leaders that the percentage of time when we look at our calendars, when we look at our own sort of like, where was I today, how important it is to be in a building. And that is really hard. And it has to be an intentional use of your time. And because you get pulled in so many directions as a superintendent, as a civic leader. So it's not just the schools that need your attention and your time, but the rest of the community as a whole. And so insisting that this is sacred time to be in classrooms and be with kids and providing whatever feedback teachers are interested in getting at that moment. Because I'll stop in a moment. One of the things that she says is she asks teachers, where can I help? What can I do? As opposed to being in the back with a checklist or somebody said recently, one of our guests, about the moment you set it up as a keeping score, then you're looking to not give them the points. Like it's not the Olympics where you're looking to deduct for
too big of a splash.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Another cannonball. Ooh, belly flap. So how do you enter into the space trying to use that appreciative lens of there are great things happening here? Oh my gosh.
And just to be clear, like I think that this does two things for them besides understanding what's happening on the site by being there as often as they are. She is building trust by the very thing that you and I talk about all the time. And that is presence. It's disciplined presence. It's disciplined connection over and over and over. So that when you did open with have enough trust to burn it and ended on it, no, she has tankards full. So
Tankards full.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
It's really impressive. Can I share one more thing? I want to share one more idea. And that is she is a lifelong Clayton educator. And she was a student. She was a teacher. She is principal and now superintendent. And it had me, I think I must have known that, but it had me reflecting on my own personal experience as a teacher. And then I did teach a bunch of different places, but I grew up in Palo Alto, California. And that's where I taught. I ended up teaching and being the very Mexican teacher I wanted to have, never having it growing up. I got to do that very thing in my home district. And there's something special about being back in your hometown in that way, where you're getting to have an impact on the thing that impacted you. And I really resonated when she said, I bleed blue and orange. And that I'm like, oh, I understand what she's talking about. It didn't cause me to be drawn back to stay there long term. I don't know if I bleed what would be black and red for my Henry M. Gunn Titans, but I know what it's like to be a part of it. I also got to be a part of it as once I came out of the system and started working with multiple different leadership and equity focused organizations. I came back to the district as a professional developer. And so I got to work with teachers and principals from that role as well.
It makes me think of, so she's put down deep roots and those roots just keep getting deeper. You had deep roots, you came back and worked there. And so it was almost like you were grafted onto an existing tree because you already understood and you took to it no problem. Whereas someone like me would just be a seed, and like building that trust over time takes so much time. But the instant credibility you have from being from there, that's amazing.
It makes me wonder now. I mean, she's been at Clayton for so long, and you guys talked about the evolution of Clayton and the way in which populations are shifting in Missouri. In Palo Alto, there had some similar, and it was just, I grew up at a time when Palo Alto, no computers didn't exist when I grew up. So there was no Silicon Valley. It was just Stanford. It was a university. That was it. It was a college town. And it's a different thing now. And I wonder how, if I were to go back and be a teacher or a principal in the district, what would that look like, and how different would it feel, and how would the intensity of Silicon Valley impact me? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. All right, Jamie, I will see you next week. How about that?
I will see you next week. Looking forward to it.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader of the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Roll Network. Bye, Jamie.
Bye.